You boys be quiet down there!
This time on Neo Alex Neo Geo Reviews, we'll be looking at King of the Monsters, 1991 from SNK. As usual, I'm playing this on my MVS cart. I'm not sure where I got this game from, but it's an English release, so it was probably in an eBay lot sometime in the early 2000s. The year is 1996, making this yet another outdated Neo Geo storyline. Choose from one of 6 towering kaiju movie-style monsters and go head-to-head in a battle over one of 6 Japanese cities. Or team up with a friend and play through the whole game together in co-op matches, fighting against 2 computer-controlled monsters. Talk about bigger, badder, better! Choose between Gion, obviously inspired by Godzilla, Wu, who looks like King Kong, Poison Ghost, probably based on Hedorah from Godzilla, Rocky, a golem-like creature based on the architecture of ancient Egypt, Beetlemania, the bug creature, and Astro Guy, probably based on Ultraman. Everyone, please use care to refer to the monsters by their correct SNK given names, and don't confuse them with their more well-known trademarked analogs.
Shh! You wanna get sued?
Giant movie monsters battling each other and leveling cities is truly an inspired idea that fits with the bigger, badder, better reputation of the Neo Geo. In fact, this was on that long list of games that made me want to own a Neo Geo all the more during the 90s. The stages are based on 6 Japanese cities, which are made to resemble their real-life counterparts. You're free to smash Tokyo Tower during the fight, and sometimes it becomes collateral damage. And if it isn't available, Kobe Port Tower or Kobe Tower will do. In Hiroshima, you can see the A-bomb dome. Osaka is where SNK is headquartered, so the company even made it possible to destroy their own headquarters. If I can get up there. Come on. Well, I'll be damned, it's part of the background. You win this one, SNK. In the course of a single playthrough, you will see all 6 of the cities and monsters twice, for a total of 12 stages. The stages get a simple palette swap the second time through to update the time of day or weather, but this does little to keep things fresh. It takes about 50 minutes to get through the game, regardless of whether or not you're playing with a friend. Personally, I didn't play the Neo Geo version much until I got the MVS cartridge. I remember once before I owned a Neo Geo, when I was traveling with my family as a kid, a motel we stayed at had a 4-slot MVS machine in their pool area, and King of the Monsters was the only game featured. It didn't look like this though. The arcade games were literally located in the pool area around the pool, and there were only a few machines. Among Neo Geo games, I wasn't too keen on King of the Monsters at the time, since I'd rented the Genesis version when it came out and was mostly indifferent to it. However, I had recently been badly bitten by the Neo Geo bug, so I was excited to play any Neo Geo game I managed to come across. I put a coin in the machine and the match started. However, instead of being bathed in the glory of Neo Geo, I was immediately met with a continue countdown screen at the start of the match. That continue music was just devastating. What the hell? Someone must have set the game's time limit to 0. Who would do something like that? Either it was a careless operator believing they could set an infinite time limit this way, or the more likely scenario, corrupted soft dip settings. Let me explain. Now that I'm more familiar with the Neo Geo hardware, it seems likely that the MVS system I was playing had dirty cartridge contacts, or the cartridge wasn't seated correctly, and so the game would have glitched the first time it booted and initialized the operator settings. This is actually a very common occurrence if your games or system are dirty. I've had games boot up with all kinds of nonsensical settings that no one in their right mind would set because the game failed to initialize properly. The problem is, these settings get saved by the system's battery-backed SRAM memory, so even if you clean, reseat, and fix the game, you will still have the weird settings saved. So you have to either manually fix all the soft dip settings or clear the bad data and all data from the backup RAM when this happens. Take it from me, my Neo Geo brethren. Get a can of deoxit, or at least some isopropyl alcohol or distilled water, and clean your system and games. Anyway, getting back to my story, I remember attempting putting a couple coins in this motel's machine before I gave up, retreating to the jacuzzi, where I sat sad and defeated. From my steamy bunker, I noticed a dad and his kid played the handful of games in the pool area, including a couple of attempts to get King of the Monsters working, before the dad gave up in confusion, moving on to the next game. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, so it may not immediately look like it, but King of the Monsters is actually a wrestling game. To summarize the basic controls, the A button punches, B kicks, C lets you run, press A and B to jump. Pressing A near your opponent when they're down will allow you to pin. Hold A and B to charge a special attack, and press down plus B to pick up your opponent. There are a couple of other things you can do, so I'm sorry if I missed your favorite. These P power-ups gradually level up your character. If I can get it. Come on, get it! Get the thing! The level of your monster carries over, even if you continue or load your game. The game actually has 6 save slots, 1 for each monster. There are 3 power-up levels for each monster. After you're all powered up, the P power-ups just give you bonus points. You'll want to get powered up as early as possible, since it makes your monster stronger against your opponents. As in all wrestling games, you must pin your opponents in order to defeat them. Generally, you must pin the CPU opponents 3 times before they go down for the full count of 3, and the same goes for your own monster. When you're pinned, you must mash the buttons to get out of it, and by the 3rd pin, it's usually not possible to prevent defeat. You'll need to do the same button mashing when you get into a grappling match. You know what? My 25-year-old controllers have just been working so well lately, I might as well give them a beating the likes of which they've never seen. Actually, I've opted to use the bean-shaped second model Neo sticks for this review. I'm a little less concerned about wearing them out, and the buttons have less travel, so the button mashing seems to take less effort. Or if you really want to get crafty, how about a turbo controller? The game is also known for being quite difficult, and a quarter muncher, since most people find it difficult to defeat most of the later CPU opponents without using up at least one, if not several, continues. There are, however, strategies that can be developed to defeat the game in one piece. Basically, this is how it's done. First, you use the run attack to knock your opponent down. If they're close enough, this is when you pick them up. Most of the time, this will allow you to throw them. Then charge up a special and hit them with that. Don't forget to grab the power-up. Rinse and repeat. Using this strategy, the game can be easier. However, because there is a lot of trial and error for most players to figure out what methods work in this game, indeed, many labeled the game a quarter muncher because they couldn't figure out how to play it. And because the gameplay tends to become repetitive regardless of the strategy, the effort needed to figure out how to play King of the Monsters well could itself be seen as a flaw with the game. Even with the correct strategy, it's difficult to execute. This is where King of the Monsters falters. The graphics and theme are great for their time, the game's failing falls square on the gameplay. The 2-player co-op mode definitely makes the game more fun. The teamwork and chaos of 4 different monsters on screen definitely makes things more exciting. The co-op mode saves the game from being complete tedium. The game's music is a mixed bag, ranging from interesting to the mood-setting music befitting the movies that inspired this game. It's not bad for what it is. One track features some technically impressive vocal chanting. It's pretty hard to make out what they're saying. But since it's so difficult to understand, you might as well come up with your own lyrics. Yes, my tastes are boring, but at least Astro Guy's theme gives the game one rocking SNK track. This music would almost feel right at home in a Fatal Fury game. Which makes sense because composer Toshikazu Tanaka, who worked on the first two Fatal Fury games and many others, is credited here under his pseudonym Tarkun. I usually try not to spoil the ending, but it's not a top concern for old arcade games that take less than an hour to finish. Most people practice by credit feeding anyway. I just wanted to share the silliness that awaits you at the end of King of the Monsters. Take a look.
The survivor is Astro Guy and Poison Ghost. There is no way to stop this monster. What should we do? Astro Guy and Poison Ghost is devastating all of Tokyo. It's a matter of time until it attacks the radio station. Oh no, it's coming. Take cover immediately. Oh no!
Oh no!
I'm not gonna lie, the first time I saw this, I lost it. Yep, I laughed at an innocent news reporter's life being ended. What were you thinking, SNK? The first time he says, "Oh no," it's just like, had to happen. What a day. I guess you can blame the clunky early 90s presentation, but I suppose this game is all about the monsters, and the human reaction to their destruction is meant to be cheesy. It fits the theme. If there's any doubt this game is a little silly, look at the goofy pictures of all the game's staff. Oddly, King of the Monsters was one of the few early Neo Geo games to not get a release on the Neo Geo CD. I find this odd because King of the Monsters is arguably one of the first noteworthy Neo Geo releases that is widely known outside of the Neo Geo community. Certainly SNK could have released King of the Monsters on CD, but for some reason they opted not to. As I mentioned, King of the Monsters was one of the first Neo Geo games that was well known not just by Neo Geo fans. The game saw two ports, one to the Sega Mega Drive/Genesis and another for the Super Nintendo, both ported by Takara. Whether Sega or Nintendo gets the better Neo Geo port varies quite a bit depending on the game, but in the case of King of the Monsters 1 at least, the Genesis version nails it. While obviously lacking the amount of colors of the arcade version, the look and feel of the Genesis version are spot on. Obviously, it doesn't play exactly the same, but if you're good at the original Neo Geo version, you should feel quite comfortable on this version. The SNES port, on the other hand, just feels sluggish and laggy. This is in large part probably due to the fact that the SNES version only updates at 30 frames per second, unlike the Genesis version. Perhaps it has more colors than the Genesis, but the gameplay is definitely off. To make matters worse, in the SNES version, they somehow managed to make pinning your opponent even more difficult and frustrating than in the Neo Geo version. I feel sorry for anyone who got stuck with the subpar SNES version. The music and sound effects are pretty bad in both ports, so there's no real winner there. Of the two ports, I'm glad the Genesis version is the one I rented as a kid. Both ports are missing the two-player co-op mode. Both are also missing Wu and Poison Ghost, so they're missing two characters in two stages. Throughout this series, we've been exploring how certain games exemplified the bigger, badder, better image of the Neo Geo that gave the console its godlike status in the 90s. Regardless of how enjoyable it is to play, King of the Monsters most certainly enhanced that badass image of the Neo Geo as an untouchable powerhouse. With its inspired city-leveling movie monster throwdown theme, I have no doubt that it left an impression of the system's amazing power on anyone who came across it in the early 90s. That being said, King of the Monsters simply isn't fun to play after the initial wow has worn off. Your mileage may vary depending on your fondness for wrestling games, but all of that button mashing just gives me a headache. I know this game has its fans, so I'm sorry if we disagree.
You did like the Lion King. You're mean.
I'm a big fan of King of the Monsters 2 because the graphics are better and it's not just wrestling, but I can take or leave King of the Monsters 1. At least I can say that it's not as glitchy as most of today's wrestling games. The Neo Geo is my favorite console, and it pains me to say this, but the King of the Monsters is one I don't take off the shelf often. Thank you for watching Neo Alex Neo Geo reviews. Next time we'll review NGH-016 Sengoku, coming soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Basement Brothers so you don't miss it.